Hey, Salt City Hoopers. That is Ken. I am Dan. It's a historic night in the NBA. We just witnessed history, and now we're going to talk about the opposite of history. We're going to talk about the different ways that the future could play out. It's trade deadline week in the NBA. We've been having fun here at Salt City Hoops with Who Says No videos. We've been having fun with a lot of great written content by different writers on the staff. And look, this is a pivotal trade deadline for the Utah Jazz. Really kind of an inflection point or a possible inflection point as they continue this rebuild. So we wanted to dive in and get you ready. There's about a day and a half left of trading action in the NBA. And rather than, look, we've been spending like 2 weeks going through specific deals and picking them apart. Rather than do that, we thought, let's do final predictions, just as kind of a way of like resetting the landscape and figuring out where the rumors stand as of tonight, through the lens of two guys named Clayton and their predictions. So Ken, you're the other half of this Clayton extravaganza. How are you doing? You excited for this trade deadline to come and go?
Well, I mean, I have been up until now, although it's taken a long time getting here. I felt like we might have seen something already by now, but well, I mean, we have in the league, but I mean, even in the Jazz, I felt like we would have possibly seen a move earlier in the season and maybe a trade deadline move by now. But the powder is all still dry ever since the start of the training camp and the regular season. So nothing has changed since October, and now we're just going to do it all in 36 hours or so, 39 hours.
So Dwayne Dedman and Kessler Edwards, that's not doing it for you. You want more.
I would like something involving the Utah Jazz, which is just kind of a silly thing, I think we get all jazzed up for trades because they're fun and they're exciting and they're new faces, and then we spend the rest of our lives either loving that they happened or bitching about the fact that they traded the wrong guy or received the wrong person in return or whatever.
Or didn't receive the right assets in return or whatever. Which, by the way, we're going to talk about one of those later.
Okay.
I teed up a question here
Cool.
specifically so that we could bridge to one of last summer's great debates, which lingers on. That's why we're gonna talk about it today. But so let's get started with some predictions that you and I are going to make, just to sort of, again, summarize what is out there, what we're hearing on the market. My first question for you is my arbitrarily set over-under for the number of Jazz trades that could happen in the next 36 hours, 38 hours, whatever it is right now. Will there be, Kenneth Clayton, more than 1.5 Jazz trades or fewer than 1.5 Jazz trades that take place before the 1 p.m. Mountain Time deadline on Thursday?
I felt more comfortable with somebody else who gave me a 2.5. I took the under because I think it's going to be about two or fewer. With this, I'm going to stick with my 2 estimate, and so I'm going to take the over 1.5
right.
Jazz trades. Although I would have felt more confident about projecting that last week, but again, we're at 36 hours left, 39 hours. So, they got to get cracking.
My guy Austin Horton, who's no longer in Jazz media, but obviously, still really connected and has a lot of friends who are in and around that franchise. The way he put it today is that the Jazz, his read on it is that the Jazz had several deals lined up and as good as done. But then he noted that, this Kevin Durant stuff has put a little wrinkle in things. Is he going to be traded? It sounds like he's not going to be traded before Thursday. But if teams think there's a chance he's available this summer, then all of a sudden the teams that feel like they might have a shot at him and the assets to get him, like the Phoenixes, might sit out this round. And so that does certainly complicate the projections. I do think, I wasn't sure where to put the over-under on this.
Yeah.
I almost put it at 2, but then that feels lame because then, the easiest thing is to say push.
Right.
And that's too easy for our version of talk radio. I think I think look, if Vegas were offering this bet in reality, I do think it would be the sort of thing where like the over was minus 140 and the under was plus 110. And conversely, if they set the over under at 2.5, the under would be like minus 200. And you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I do think that it's like that's the range. And only because like the Jazz might have three trades they want to make, but making three trades means that three teams have agreed to what you want.
yeah.
And that's the harder part, which is why I think I would say I would peg the range at like I I'm almost certain there will be something that happens. So one I think is kind of a foregone conclusion in my mind. Two is probably as likely, and then on the outside chance it could be three.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I think if you see a third trade, it could be, there could be a third significant trade, or that third one might be one of these like rearranging deck chairs type trade where it's not really that big a deal, but it moves a tiny bit of salary somewhere, whether it's in or out. So, but so again, so two I think is entirely within the realm of possibility, and then one more of some type is possible, but less likely. Again, I mean, it takes. The other thing is, I mean, again, we're down to 39 hours. It takes time to set these trades up. It takes time to negotiate and bicker back and forth between a couple of GMs, run things up the flagpole on either side. Deals don't come together really fast. Although they've been working on it for quite some time, but it just sounds like I think as of Monday, Tony Jones at the Athletic was saying that nothing was imminent with at least two or three of the biggest trades that we've seen rumored.
Yeah. Yep. Fair enough. All right. So to your point, some of those trades could be multiple player trades. In fact, a lot of the ones that are being rumored or bandied about are trades that involve multiple Jasmine. So the next question is over under 3.5 Jazz players involved in trades in the next day and a half. Would you take four or more? Would you take three or fewer players traded from the Jazz? By the way,
I
this is a really convenient spot to be in because I get to hear your answers first on
Right,
all these. Maybe
exactly.
I'll go first next time.
I,
Sorry about that.
yeah. Well, I'm actually going to throw in a question after this one that you don't even know about yet. So,
Oh, all right.
yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Um,
Bring it on.
over under 3.5. I've been I've actually been asked that exact question just on Twitter, and I answered under, although I gave it the slight caveat under 3.5 actual rotation players. So I think probably they're capping at three rotation players. But again, if you saw a Leandro Bolmaro or a Doak or somebody thrown in to make things match, or just to move something off the salary sheet as a courtesy type thing, that could happen. And while I'd count it, I kind of wouldn't count it.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, I might like just to be provocative. I might take the over on this
Yeah.
one,
Well,
especially if we're counting like any guys, because
right.
here's the thing, as we're about to talk about, um, I do think Vando is it's probably a foregone conclusion that he's traded. Um, I've got questions as to why. He's 24. He's got some unique skills, right? He's not a skill big in the sense that he's out shooting and doing like Nikola Jokic type stuff, but he handles the ball a little bit. He can decision make from the elbows. He does. So I've had some people say like, why would the Jazz give that up? They're looking for young talent, especially young talent with length and size. Um, the answer is just look. He projects as a role player. Role players, when you're building a team over the long term, role players come and go. Role players are
Yeah.
replaceable. They're by definition fungible, and so and to a lesser degree, the same thing is true of Malik Beasley. Like, the chances that your seventh best player, or whatever you think Vando is, right? But he's somewhere around your sixth, seventh, eighth best player.
Hmm.
The chances that that player is still your seventh best player in 3 years when you're coming out the other side of a rebuild is I think less realistic. So I would say Vando, because of that, his value in today's marketplace is probably too good for the Jazz to not realize that value and hang on to, again, a seventh man. Beasley, I think, is pretty likely to be traded. There's enough interest out there in Kelly Olynyk that he's he's at least a 50-50 to be traded. Then you have the older vets, Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley. Then you have all the guys that you just mentioned, the guys that could be throw-ins for salary reasons, whether that's Rudy Gay or Nah or THT if they're going after bigger salary or Bolmaro, like you just said, Doak. Like there are just too many guys that I think could be put into deals that I'm gonna take the over like semi confidently.
Okay.
I might want odds. I might want odds from this imaginary sports book if I'm taking the over on that number. Like I might want it to be like a plus 130 to really make my bet worth it. But I think there's a chance that there's a semi decent shakeup of the roster 1 through 15, maybe.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And again, I mean, I'd have to think a lot more about that if I hadn't already answered that to somebody with that caveat of rotation players. And then it gets difficult to say who's a rotation player because we've actually seen a few people on the tail end of the rotation in and out. So is Nickeil Alexander-Walker a rotation player? Is THT a rotation player? I mean, he was. He's not so much anymore. So,
right.
I probably am just making it more complicated by adding that caveat in there, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I also get the position. I get saying under just because, and people, I think people don't realize this, right? The most likely scenario in any individual, player's case is stasis, right? Like that's just, it's easier for teams to leave it to, like, of all the options, would you take, like Vando getting traded or Vando staying with the Jazz? Like I might take getting traded in his case, but still like him staying with the Jazz is the highest single possibility out of all the places he could be at 101 on Thursday afternoon. And obviously same is true of everyone else going down the line. So, like that's the hard thing is it's really easy in this league when you start negotiating and teams won't give what you want and there's push and pull and all that. It's really easy to just not do a deal as opposed to, being the side that caves or being the side that talks themselves into something. So I won't be shocked if it's under 3.5, but it's sounding to me like they might have some things lined up involving more than 4 players, but who knows if that's really true.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Do you want my question that I'm inserting into the list here that you don't even know about? It's not.
I like it.
It's not difficult. All right. Under. Will the Jazz net over or under 1.5 additional first-round draft picks?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And this is net, so if they trade 2 out or receive 2 and trade 1 out, that's 1. I'm sure you understand what net means, but in case,
yeah. My brother's an accountant.
That was for that was for the listeners who don't understand my accounting terms.
I've heard about net before.
Okay.
That's a tough question. I think again, the safest thing is to say under.
Yeah.
I think that it's easy to pretend like all these guys are worth a first in a vacuum. That's just not always the case. Although I have one coming about Kelly Olynyk that's kind of interesting for reasons past and present.
Yeah.
A really believable scenario for like Kelly Olynyk, just to use a guy and zoom in on him for a minute. A really likely scenario is that Kelly Olynyk doesn't get you a first, but he gets you kind of a second draft opportunity, right? You get a guy making mid to high 7 figures who hasn't really panned out in his first spot and his team's ready to move on. And and so like they're not gonna sweeten it with a pick because they're kind of already giving you someone who's young and in that salary range. So knowing that, and then obviously with Malik and Vando, There's the New York rumor, which nets them a pick.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Atlanta rumor, which may or may not. Um, there's the Lakers scenario that might be a one pick deal, um, might be a two pick deal, might be a two pick deal with the Jazz sending that Brooklyn Philly pick back to help the Lakers offset the pain of sending both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So like there are possibilities to get to two more. I just think the safer bet is that for some of these, like look, the Vando thing for Nasir Little, like I think the Jazz probably do that trade without a first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Nasir Little is more of a prospect. Jared Vanderbilt is a little bit more of a today contributor, but that's fine. Like I think the Jazz would do that for someone with Little's length, his shooting prowess, and just to take a look at another young guy. So I'm gonna say under, but you did kind of stump me there.
Yeah,
What's your answer to that one?
I have been saying under because again, I think because the Jazz have been asking for and publicly making it known that they think each of four guys are worth a first round pick. I think fans kind of get that in their head and think we are getting a first round pick for each of these guys. No, that's an asking price, and that doesn't mean you're going to get it. And then there are different values of different first round picks, whether it's from a different team or it's a protected pick or whatever. So I'm just a little more conservative on thinking, this isn't summer 2022 anymore when you're trading two, three-time All-Stars and also getting a bonus pick for Royce O'Neal. This is what it is. And for two reasons, because you've got a strong draft in 2023, allegedly, and because now this potential Kevin Durant logjam, I don't think first round picks are going to be passing around quite as much as they might have even last Thursday, because before Kyrie popped off and decided he wanted out, and now there's a whole lot of people saying, well, what if? So I think I'm pretty comfortable at one. Happy to be wrong and happy to have it be the over, if it means the Jazz are getting better value than I expect out of these players.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a vacuum, like I'm not sure Vando gets you a good first on his own. I'm not sure Malik Beasley gets you. Malik Beasley might, just
Yeah.
because his contract gives you optionality. He has a skill set that every team needs, etc. Mike, a little dicier, just because of the money on next year's
Yeah.
contract. So I do think that the most likely, not the most likely single scenario, but if the Jazz do bring back multiple picks, I think it might be a scenario where they package some guys together who might not have gotten that asset on there. Like you could trade Vando for a second and Kelly Olynyk, excuse me, I'm apparently dying. And Kelly Olynyk for a second, or maybe you could trade them together for a first. And I do think that that's a scenario that is in play.
Right.
All right. Well, let's jump to the Olynyk thing. I'm going out of order here, but because we're kind of halfway down that path anyway. There was much consternation last summer when the Jazz did not get a pick for Bojan Bogdanovic, a first-round pick. Well, they didn't get any pick, but everyone assumed they'd get a first. Multiple people have reported. I've gotten the same sense that the Jazz they had multiple offers available to them where they could have gotten a first. But the problem is when you're trading a $20 million player to a contender is that contender is undoubtedly over the cap and likely over the tax. And so they have to send back salary. And they don't want to send back salary that's tied to useful players because they're contending. They're not trying to subtract good players. Yeah. They're trying to subtract salary that's attached to bad players. So could the Jazz have gotten a Miami first for Bogey if they had taken Duncan Robinson?
Yep.
Well, yeah, sure, because Duncan Robinson is a bad contract. Like he's got, as of last summer, he still had I think $60 million owed to him or something like that.
Yeah.
And usually in the NBA economy, if you're going to take on $60 million of bad debt, you're going to get a pick or two just for that, even regardless of Bogey, right? Phoenix could have offered a first to Vando. It's been reported places that that pick was likely protected anyway, protected to a level that it might not have even turned into a first. Plus, Phoenix wanted other stuff there.
Yeah.
So like I'm not bringing this up to relive the Bogey thing. I'm bringing this up because what the Jazz got for Bogey instead was Kelly Olynyk, and now Kelly Olynyk is potentially on the trading block as well. So my question is, do the Jazz wind up getting a first round pick for KO, and in so doing, sort of transitively get a first for Bogey in the end anyway?
My answer is no. I don't think there's really much of a shot at that, unless they circle back. We know Miami has been interested in Kelly. If they circle back and decide 2.5 years, I don't count the rest of this year's salary because they're paying it to somebody anyway. So it's to me it's just at this point it's the future year's salary. So if they decide 2.5 years of Duncan Robinson, because his third year, if he's not playing well, is only about half guaranteed. So if they decide 2.5 years is palatable enough that we'll send out Olynyk for Robinson and a first, then maybe. I still don't know why Miami would do that, because I guess because they're getting off of Robinson, it still just seems like a lot to be giving away for Olynyk. But with getting off, what is it now, 37, about 47 million guaranteed after this season, maybe they would throw the first out there. They can do 23, or they can do late in the window, like 27, 28, 29, I think, something like that.
Well, part of the reason why I think that the Bogey for Olynyk interested the Jazz is because the money is less, which means it's actually easier to trade Olynyk too.
Right.
So you don't necessarily have to trade someone in the Duncan Robinson price range to bring back Kelly. You could trade a Victor Oladipo. You could trade a Caleb Martin plus actually, I think you could do Caleb Martin straight up and still keep them under the. No, you couldn't,
No.
but it would be close.
Yeah.
You could do Caleb Martin and a minimum salary guy and still keep Miami under the tax. So I think I agree with you. I don't think he's likely to get a first, but the fact that 5 months later here we are and Kelly Olynyk kind of has value of his own, to me says that maybe all the hand wringing, like the Jazz got in exchange for Bogey, they got an asset. Mm-hmm. Now, in exchange for that asset, they're going to get something else of value, right? And the example I like to use is the Jazz traded Adrian Dantley back in 1986 for, was it Kent Benson and Kelly Tripucka? Am I remembering that right?
It was Kelly Tripucka and Kent Benson, correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
So then they traded one of those guys for someone else, and one of those guys for Mike Brown, and then they traded Mike Brown for Felton Spencer, and then later they traded Felton Spencer for a draft pick, and then that draft pick became Andrei Kirilenko.
Mm-hmm.
So look, like things have a cascading sort of lifespan, and I myself at the time of the Bogey trade, I said, like, look, if the Jazz traded the best player in that deal, it feels like they should have gotten something back. So I understand the criticism on a broad level, but if the Jazz turned Bogey into something, and then that something not only has given them 50 games of whatever you think of Olynyk, he also has allowed them to play a certain way.
Uh-huh.
And then if that turns into something else, then it's worth just keeping that in mind against what the options were on the table last summer for Bogey, which again, you could have gotten a first, but you were going to have to take some real crap back with it. Like $47 million worth of Russell Westbrook, for example.
Right. You mentioned Caleb Martin, and until this morning, I had my eye halfway on Caleb Martin and Dwayne Dedmon, who would have been a deal that wouldn't have maybe involved a pick coming back. But I think you look at a Caleb Martin's deal that's at 6.5, 6.8, 7.1, and you say it's not the same as a first-round pick, but it's such a reasonable, such a tradable, such a good deal that he's probably playing beyond that salary that maybe it's worth it and they would do. But now with Dedmon out of the picture in Miami, I don't know that there's another deal there that really makes sense, unless they go big and go, I shudder to think Duncan Robinson.
Yeah, Yeah, I sort of
I don't expect that.
yeah, I sort of I'm not completely ruling out a Duncan Robinson trade, but just from what I've heard in the past, I don't think
Yeah.
the Jazz have much appetite for that. There are other places that reportedly would like Kelly Olynyk. The one that keeps coming up is um, a Wiseman deal with Golden State. Works from a salary cap perspective. It would cost the Warriors a bunch of tax because they're a repeater team and they're well over the tax line.
Yeah.
If they wanted to, they could throw in a cheap player with him, like JaMychal Green or Pat Baldwin Jr. They probably wouldn't throw in PBJ. They probably, they just got him. He's in year one of a rookie scale contract, but a Ryan, whatever. They could throw in something to sort of alleviate the tax situation, or they could just say, "Hey, we're ready to move off James Wiseman. We need kind of a playmaking big, a big who sees the floor." In kind of the style of to preserve the style of play because that's a lot of the same way that they use Draymond Green and increasingly even Kevon Looney, weirdly enough, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that was his profile starting out.
No.
So, that's just one more team. There are other teams that have been connected to KO, but I still think the most likely scenario with KO is one of those where it is a Caleb Martin situation where you're getting someone young and kind of interesting, or it is a James Wiseman where you're getting another team's, you know, I don't want to say trash and treasure because we're talking about human beings here, but like someone that didn't work out somewhere else, and maybe they need that second draft opportunity to revitalize their career and have another shot. So sounds like we agree on that one.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
All right, this next one is a multi-part question. Um, I can go first on this one if you're tired of being in the hot seat, or you can go whatever, or we can break it up into pieces.
I mean, you sent me the
Um,
questions beforehand. It's not like you're springing
I
these on
know,
me. Yeah.
I know, yeah. So Vando and Beasley,
Mm-hmm.
they've been tied together in a lot of the rumors, so I kind of put them together in this question. So
And
the
and
question,
since they entered the league, did they both
yes,
enter with Denver? Both went to
yes,
Minnesota. Both
yes,
came to Utah, and
yes,
maybe are going to move on to a fourth team together.
correct,
Yes.
correct. Those two they just can't quit each other. Um, so the question here is, what is in your mind the single most likely landing spot for Vando, the single most likely spot for Beasley, or if you think they are going to get moved together, the single place where you think that they wind up together? I have ideas on this one, um, but either way,
I think just because we've DM'd enough, I think we probably have the same answer on this one. I think the most likely, just given what you and I know, is Vando Beasley to Atlanta for Collins. And just because my rationale behind that is, I think we understand that Atlanta is no longer asking for a first round pick for Collins, for John Collins.
right?
The Jazz have been asking for a first round pick to take him because of 100 million ish left of salary left out there.
Yeah,
It just feels to me like if nothing else, unless they get just a better offer for the two individually or somewhere else, that feels like a bridgeable gap. And I mean, just the fact that they've gotten that far means the Jazz must be semi comfortable with the huge salary out 4 years. So if they've already if they've already kind of mentally crossed that bridge, would it be that hard to find a middle ground between no draft pick at all and one draft pick? Whether that's this draft pick going this way and a couple seconds going back the other way, or just Atlanta sending seconds, or this and a swap, or just there are ways to bridge that gap, and it feels to me like that's the most likely. It's not necessarily my favorite, but just because I've wanted for years, because I think he's popular among Jazz fans, I've wanted to like John Collins, and every time I try to watch him, including last Friday night, I feel pretty underwhelmed.
yeah, yeah. He's a weird player relative to sort of his profile and what people think of him. Um, I think that the Jazz do like him, and I think they like his fit with the Markkanen and
Yeah.
Kessler front court because, as I've said on the Who Says Knows about Collins, um, he's a guy who like he's a 3-4-5, right? Probably mostly a 4-5 type guy.
Yeah.
Markkanen is a 3-4-5, but probably mostly a 3-4 type guy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if Kessler is on a trajectory where he's going to be like really good, like 34 minutes a night forever good, then you want guys who can play the 3 and the 4 next to him as kind of your main front court. And I think John Collins and Lauri Markkanen accomplish that. If instead you're looking at a future for Kessler where he's, good, but like Zubac's level good, where, he's someone who you play 20, 25 minutes a night, but you also want an option like the Clippers do with Zubac, where you want an option where you can sit him down and play Marcus Morris at center instead and play small and match up with opponents and that sort of thing. The Jazz could do that with the Collins, Markkanen front court as well. So I do think they like the optionality. I don't think that they view him as another star, like a complementary star next to Markkanen. And that's, I think, why they have been approaching that as a situation where they should get a pick because they're taking on what really, honestly, if you don't view John Collins as a star, he's making borderline star money.
Yeah.
So if you view him as a nice role player, then yeah, he's a little overpaid on that deal. And I think that's why they have been seeking compensation. But I'm with you. It just feels like there's middle ground. So I think that, yeah, if those two guys do move together, I think Atlanta is probably my most likely at this point, although the New York thing sounds like it does have legs too, where they go and the Jazz get a young player like Obi Toppin. They have to absorb a salary like Evan Fournier, and then they get a pick from New York. Probably not one of New York's better firsts, but you could, they have some extras coming from other teams that are conditional and might turn into something half decent. A late lottery pick from Detroit or Washington in future years. So those are probably my two most likely, if those two stay, as we talked about, kind of keep getting traded as Siamese twins that can't break apart. Do you have a favorite Vando destination or a most likely Vando situation if he goes on his own? Or did you not think about it since I gave you the option on this?
No, I did. I'm going to go back 1 second, though. I was a guest last night on Hitting the High Notes podcast with Who and Jared.
Shout out to Who.
Yeah. And you're not going to shout out to Jared? You're going to
shout out to Jared.
You're going to hurt feelings. Yeah.
Well, I started that when you were mid-sentence and, the delay and everything. I mostly say that because Who reached out to me yesterday, too, to see if I could go on, too. And it was such a busy day at work that I just totally forgot to message him back. So mostly I feel bad that I left Who hanging. Yeah. But Who and Jared are both awesome.
Okay. All right. So I was a guest on their podcast last night, and we were talking about, how the Jazz would prefer an unprotected, probably New York draft pick. New York would clearly prefer whichever of the protected picks they own, that they probably the one that they feel is least valuable. And I said I would, if I were negotiating, if my name were Danny Ainge, Justin Zanuck, or anybody else who's involved in this, I would say let's split the difference. I would try to split the difference with give me both Detroit and Washington. I think they're both impaired picks, but I think they both will convey someday, and even if one of them doesn't, the other one will, and so you have a shot at getting two picks probably in the 9 to 15 range. I don't know if New York could go for it, but if I was pushing for the unprotected, I would certainly offer that as a fallback position and see if I could make that happen, because then you get two bites at that 10 to 15 range apple.
Yeah, I'm not sure New York would go for that. To your point, now what you could do is you could say, okay, and we'll throw you the Brooklyn Philly pick to kind of offset that. Because then the Jazz are still ostensibly upgrading they're getting the one and they're upgrading another, or you could do a right to swap with, in one of the years that pick is owed, but that gets complicated because then it has to be a year that the Jazz own a pick, and
Yeah.
which pick and which and how protected is the swap, like all that has to be negotiated,
Yeah.
and that gets complex. um those picks get to the point where they're, I think one is top 8 protected at its least protected, and the other
Mm-hmm.
is top 9 at its least protected. So I don't think those are bad picks. I think they are likely to convey. I think I might do that deal. But again, then you're paying Evan Fournier next year. So, kind of like the Mike thing that we've been talking about with his salary into next year and how that complicates things for some teams. Um, I don't like that's not great because it limits the Jazz's options next year. Not that I think they're going to be a free agent player, but there are other ways to use cap space too. Um, I think my favorite Vando alone destination. I hope we don't agree on this too, because this is going to be really boring if it's
Uh,
just 45 minutes of us agreeing.
if we do, I'll just totally wing something and make some stupid trade up.
Um, I think that the Portland interest is real, and I think if he goes somewhere on his own, Portland has pieces in that salary range that I think would appeal to the Jazz as low risk flyers. So I'm going to say Portland if Vando moves on his own, but I'm saying that or moves not with Beasley. I'm saying that not totally convincingly, but I could even picture a scenario where if the Jazz do get over the hump with the Lakers deal, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, um, where Vando goes to the Blazers as part of a Lakers deal, as part of the Jazz getting up to the number where they can take back Russ's 47 million.
Okay. I'm gonna say he's coming down to the Valley of the Sun to hang with me.
Okay, all right,
They had interest in Vanderbilt in the off season. They tried to get him added into the bogey deal that didn't happen. To me, he's not 100% a Jay Crowder, but the defense and the effort and the hustle is Jay Crowder esque. I don't think he might be as good a 3 point shooter, but he's not as frequent a 3 point shooter, and that's probably actually a little bit of a dig on Crowder if they're both the same, and yet Crowder fires away more. So I think he's the type of guy who'd fit in well with their rotation. He'd 100% be coming off the bench, but sometimes I think players when they move and they're coming off the bench, they're more open to that than if they lose their role,
yeah,
like he's done with Walker Kessler kind of overtaking him, and which may very well be part of the reason that at the start of the season we talked about him not really being available, and now we're talking about him being a de facto already traded guy, even though we're not quite at the deadline yet. That everybody assumes he will be moved.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I think there's yeah. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I know what the locker room dynamics are with him or anyone else.
Sure.
I do think that coming off the bench for a 500-ish team is different from like a contender calling and saying, "Hey, we need you for 20 minutes a night or 25 minutes a night or whatever." Um, so I do think kind of coming to a 500-ish team and thinking like, "Oh, I'm going to be one of the elder statesmen and really guide things," and then you get supplanted by a rookie. Like I do think that there's a chance that that's been, um, that's been hard for him to swallow, and maybe that's part of the reason why he is capital A available. I don't think he was ever off limits. The vibe I got last summer was just that other teams were trying to kind of Jedi mind trick the Jazz into just throwing him into deals.
Yeah.
And the Jazz just never felt like he was a throw in. They always felt like at some point in time there's going to be an opportunity to get something for Vando. So why would we just toss him into the Phoenix deal along with Bogey to get a bad first round pick that
Yeah.
might not even be a first round pick, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're saying sort of the same thing, and Phoenix isn't a bad call either for Vando.
Yeah. Now,
Any more?
I would have possibly maybe said Portland, although
but I stole your
No,
thunder.
no, no, no. But I mean, honestly, if you'd asked me over the weekend, I would have said Portland. The reason I kind of came up with an alternate answer to that was just um, their trade to player exception expiring last night.
Yeah,
Made me feel like now there's 120 reasons why that could have expired. Maybe Portland was 100% on the phone saying, "Let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. We want to bring him into our TPE, but also send back salary and then generate a new TPE." And maybe the Jazz weren't ready. So it doesn't
right.
mean Portland wasn't willing to take him. It just, for whatever reason, didn't happen on Monday, February 6th. So now they no longer have a traded player exception to bring in, I think it was 6.9 million of salary into. So now if they get that 6.9 million of salary or whatever level of salary they get, they're just taking it in and not
Yeah.
creating a future bucket.
Well, so two thoughts here, and these are both going to be thoughts that the nerds out there are really going to love, and everyone else is going to glaze over for a couple minutes. So, non-nerds, just bear with me. I'll let you know when you can wake up from your little power nap
Actually, if you're a non-nerd, he said a couple minutes, so hit the forward 30-second
here.
button 4 times.
4 times.
Yes.
No, I said a couple of things. Actually.
Oh, okay. Well,
So
no guarantees.
So number one, Zach Lowe's running joke is that the Sixers the Blazers are a Tesla under the luxury tax threshold. So they're $67,000 under the tax threshold. So yeah, I don't think it was ever likely that they were going to use the TPE the way TPEs are
Oh
sort of
yeah,
intended,
sure.
where like you just use it to absorb salary. But to your point, they could have used it they could have acquired Vando into a TPE and then created a new TPE for whatever salary they were sending out. Because whatever they do, they're sending out at least as much salary. At least that's it. Like they're not going to go into the tax for this roster that
Right,
is
right.
not competing for a title this year. So
Well,
that's thought number one.
okay. I was going to just add to that. I mean, even little for Vando puts them into the tax because Little is paid
Right.
202,000
Yeah.
more than Vando. So then they've got to say, "Will you take another player because we need to we don't want to pay." And it's not about going into the tax like barely dipping your your toe in the pool. It's you lose that estimated $17 million payout that comes to non-tax teams. Okay.
And
Yeah.
you hit the repeater tax
Yeah.
sooner in the future, right? So now we're getting,
Yeah.
we're making the nerds happy.
All
My
right.
other nerdy thought is the other reason why Portland might have been ready to make a deal like the Vando deal, and then it didn't happen, and their TPE expired. Is the Jazz might have if the Jazz had things set up in a way that like, okay, we're going to use Vando over here in a Portland deal and get a look at Nasir Little. We're going to use Beasley as part of this, and we're going to use these players over here, and then suddenly one of those teams that they had kind of lined up said, "Oh, hang on, we're checking into this KD thing. Can you just hold that thought?"
Yeah.
Then the Jazz might suddenly go, "Oh, well, we might need Vando for kind of our plan B. So now we have to call Portland and tell them to hang on because a third team called us and asked us to
Mm-hmm.
hang on." So, again, we don't know that, but I'm just saying that's why this KD thing, that's why I think it was really useful today for Adrian Wojnarowski to tweet out that like, hey, Kevin Durant is likely not moving this week. I think the Jazz were probably happy
Yeah.
that got tweeted out, but the teams that still think they have a shot at him this summer
Mm-hmm.
will still be careful about keeping their powder dry and monitoring that situation. So anyway, non-nerds, you can wake back up. I
Okay.
promise we're done with the really intricate, interdependent cap maneuver part of this podcast for now. Do you have any thoughts on Beasley? Where Beasley's most likely destination if he's not tethered to Jared Vanderbilt?
If he's not tethered to Jared Vanderbilt, I almost just have kind of spaced on where else he's even been rumored because he's been rumored so much with Vanderbilt. So give me 2 or 3 options.
I'll give you my answer.
Yeah, sure.
I think if Beasley is somewhere, if Beasley is playing for another team this weekend, and Jared Vanderbilt is not his teammate, I think there's a non-zero chance. The chance might be overstated today in the media, in the rumor mill, but I think there's a non-zero chance it could be the Lakers.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Yeah. Well,
which
that's the biggie. Yeah.
Yeah, which gives us a bridge to talk about the Laker trade for a minute. I do think it's interesting that Shams Charania, who I think historically does not have great contacts, great relationships inside the Jazz front office. So what Shams says, you're probably getting the Lakers perspective, right? And Shams came out today and said that he's hearing that any deal involving the Jazz and a couple of Jazz players and Russell Westbrook coming to Utah and getting bought out would be a one-pick deal. Tony Jones, who is connected with Jazz people and who does kind of know how the Jazz front office think, he's been telling people all day on Twitter that he thinks if that deal goes down, it has to be a two-pick deal. So that's why I'm still a little dubious that a Laker deal is going to happen. It still sounds like the two sides are playing a little bit of chicken there. Now, what has been reported, and I can vouch, like I've heard this too, the Jazz were willing last summer to give them the Brooklyn Philly pick, the least favorable of Brooklyn, Philly, Houston, to give that pick they got in the Royce O'Neal deal, which is not a very valuable pick, but it just sort of offsets the fact that the Lakers are putting both picks in a deal. So if the Jazz can get two from LA, they will give one pick back so that if the Lakers do come up with something later, they're not completely hamstrung without the ability to trade a pick. But it doesn't sound like that was super enticing to the Lakers. And because of that, I still feel like there is a middle ground there, but I'm not sure that either team, like, it's not a middle ground. It's one team is going to get what they want and the other team is going to not get what they want if that trade happens. So that's why I'm a little less certain on that one, but that might be the single most likely Beasley scenario in my mind if it's not with Vando.
Right. And actually,
or like I said, Conley, Beasley going to the Lakers, Vando going to the Blazers, the Jazz taking Russell Westbrook and Nasir Little, and so like some kind of framework like that could also work.
Right. Yeah, I remember tweeting back in mid-September, late September, that I had kind of moved on from the Lakers deal. I think it was when they had already acquired Pat Bev from the Jazz, and then they added Schroeder. And when they added him, I thought, I just don't see this deal happening because the Jazz were angling to get Conley included, and all of a sudden they were swimming in point guards, and who they had just acquired. So it wasn't like they were just had a surplus from prior seasons. I mean, I think that the talks have been rejuvenated, and they probably were approached with some level of new eyes. But I still feel, well, I'm probably a little more optimistic than I was in September that it could happen. But I'd still say it's unlikely, or less than 50%, or wherever whatever I'm putting that. It's more likely to not happen than it is to happen, because there does seem to be a real value. I was interested. It was I believe it was on the low post with Brian Windhorst today. He asked him, would you do one pick for Bojan Bogdanovic or two picks for all the Jazz guys? And they both just immediately said one pick for Bojan. So while I see some value to a Conley, Beasley, maybe Vando, maybe somebody else package, clearly not everybody does, and it's not just Lakers fans who are trying to argue about two picks. It's a couple of guys who actually know the league and feel that way.
Yeah, for sure. I think Beasley could help a lot of teams. But we can leave it at that because as usual we're going pretty long here. Beasley could help a lot of teams. You mentioned Mike Conley, so let's transition to the next question, which is a sad one to say out loud because we love these fellas. But the next question I have for you is, and I made this easy, like we don't have to parse the odds individually. Just will at least one of Mike Conley or Jordan Clarkson get moved this week?
My best guess. Go ahead.
I think the answer is yes.
Oh, you do?
I do.
You expect that Mike will move, probably Mike? Or do you think there's some chance Jordan moves?
I think Conley is more likely than Clarkson. I just I think that I think that neither guy is, you know, really going to be a huge part of the future. There was a
Mm-hmm.
chance Jordan could have been. The fact that he declined his extension, which was the maximum that the Jazz could have offered, but not equal to his market value as a free agent. I think that complicated the calculus in the Jazz's mind. So I think now you're in a situation where you go, okay, how likely is it really that either of these guys is part of the medium term future, let alone the long term? And if the answer is not that likely, and there's interest today, then I just think at some point you have to discuss it. So I like you know I already said that I think I put the over under on total Jazz players traded at 3.5, which means I'm sort of expecting Vando Beasley and something else to happen, or Vando Olynyk and something else to happen, and I think that something else might wind up involving one of the guards.
Yeah.
It'll suck because I love both guys.
Yeah. Okay. No, I would put both of them below 50%, but if you take those odds and say, well, would one of the two get traded? Obviously,
Yeah.
that probably pushes it over 50%, depending on what fictitious numbers I'm assigning to each of these probabilities. No, I do think. I mean, my conventional wisdom going into the last 5 or 6 days was Mike was more possible, because I don't feel like the number that Clarkson is after is necessarily enough to be scaring off the Jazz in the future, especially with potentially a salary cap rise going for in a couple of years. But you know, if you have a good offer on the phone, and most people have agreed that of all the Jazz players, probably the price for or the return for Clarkson would be the highest of the five players maybe. So you get the right caller on the phone and you get that right offer, it could happen.
Yeah. So I think you're right that the Jazz aren't really scared of whatever Jordan Clarkson's market would be. Um, I'm probably more scared about it only because the man is 30.
Yeah.
So does it make sense for a team in this part of the competitive cycle to pay a guy 20 to 25? Like that could very easily be the contract that 2 or 3 years down the road you're going, oh, they're ready to make that next move to be competitive, but it's hard to do that because of Jordan Clarkson's money on the books, right? Um, so like, look, having good players on market value contracts is not a negative in the NBA. Like if you get a good player locked in on a good market value deal, then you have options because you can keep them and play them, or you can trade them and whatever. So I'm not saying that it's a hell no with Jordan Clarkson, but if he signs a big deal and then starts to decline at all, that could start to be uncomfortable in the context of a rebuilding team. Um,
Yeah.
but I think you're broadly right that it doesn't scare the Jazz. I'm nervous about it because I'm not looking to do 4 years, 90 million to pay a guy until he's 34. If
Yeah.
if I'm where the Jazz are in the cycle, I don't think the Jazz are that worried about that in Clarkson's case, because I think they feel like his game will age a little better than a guy who just jumps over people. But but I don't know. That's maybe one area where I feel a little differently than I think the Jazz feel about just kind of roster building in general.
What about just to throw another number out there? What about 4 years, 80? If it was centered on 20 million instead of starting at 20 and moving up.
Yeah, maybe I might want to do like declining if that was the
Uh,
case, just so that when the Jazz are ready to start putting together the final pieces on a contending roster in 3 to 4 years, in the best case scenario, right? We don't know if the Jazz are going to be contending in 3 to 4 years,
right.
but if they are, they might value flexibility at that point in the process more than they need flexibility in the 23-24 season. So, like I said, I don't like Jordan Clarkson is worth that much. That sounds like an
Mm-hmm.
exorbitant number, but it's just
No.
not the way that the cap is moving. We're in an environment where next season, like forget the cap jump and all this theoretical stuff that might happen later. Next season, the mid-level exception in the NBA is going to be something like 12 million.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's exception money, which means that, low-end starter money is now going to be like 18 to 20.
Mm-hmm.
And solid non-star starter money is going to be in the mid-20s. And so, like, the whole economy is just shifting in that way in the NBA. So I'm not saying this isn't a treatise on me saying that Jordan Clarkson is or isn't worth that. It's more about fit and timeline and what the Jazz might be trying to accomplish in, the 26-27 season or the 25-26 season or whenever it is that they're ready to, that they're ready to sort of assemble the version that they're going to try to contend with around Markkanen and, Kessler and whoever they've drafted, and then maybe some of these other ancillary pieces like Sexton or Obagi or whoever else sticks around in the project. But that's why I would be listening if there were offers out there for Clarkson where I could get like someone kind of interesting and young and an asset. Like I would listen to that today just because I don't know how Clarkson fits on the 26-27 Jazz.
That's fair. I've just been pegging him in that little bit lower salary range, and that's why I didn't think it would be as much of a reach. But you're right. Any of those five, I mean, I've just been pegging him as Vando, Beasley, probably Olynyk, Conley, Clarkson order as far as likelihood of being traded. But any of the five are potential if the right offer comes across the phone.
I will say this, doing the math real fast in my handy dandy little spreadsheet. So the max extension the Jazz could offer was around 16 million, which means that comes to 4 years, 72, and he ostensibly said no to that.
Yeah.
So 480 might be a little wishful thinking,
yeah,
but maybe not. I mean, that's 8 million more. So, all right, final thing, and then we'll let these poor people go to bed.
It's okay. They're listening on like 1.5 speed anyway, so
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Which the way I talk sometimes, that's got to be like really headache inducing.
Right.
Sorry about that. All right, there's 27 games left. 26 after the trade deadline, but let's just lump Wednesday night's game in with this. With 27 games left, and we've both agreed that it's likely that the Jazz make, a couple of deals involving 3, 4, 5, somewhere in the 3 to 5 player range, that they might trade a vet, that they probably will trade Vando and like one of Beasley or Olynyk. So given all of that, let's just ballpark. What do we think the last 27 games look like record-wise if we're predicting? They're one game under 500 right now. How do the last 27 games go after they do whatever it is we think they're going to do in the next 36 hours?
Sorry, I was just changing my my stats to match what you're asking, or my projections. So it'll surprise you not at all that I have a spreadsheet kind of projecting out the rest of the season. I haven't yet populated one for the whole league or the whole Western Conference or anything like that, but I do have the Jazz plotted out. I have the Jazz kind of as presently constituted. It looks like at about 12 and 15. So
okay.
If we're talking about some version of the Jazz that is minus 3.5 players, because that was our over-under, and then I would probably feel like dropping 3 or 4 wins off of that. I do know there are those out there who would still say, but Markkanen is so good, he's an all-star, and Obagi is just coming into his own. That's all good and well. But if you're giving away the kind of talent, not giving away, if you're selling off the kind of talent and the kind of contracts that we've been talking about here, there are games where Malik Beasley's shooting was ostensibly the difference between a win and a loss.
Right. Or
there
kept
are
them in the game long
yes,
enough that
yeah,
then,
hmm
someone else could win it
yeah.
for them.
There are games where obviously Mike Conley's abilities help the Jazz focus and get their offense running and get things happening. There were probably fewer games that Vanderbilt by himself maybe dragged the team to a win, but his effort and intensity, who knows? So I think if you knock out two or three or four of those players, you're probably going to come in. So if you're wanting an actual number, I'd say something like 9-18,
9-18.
something like that.
I was gonna say 10 and
Okay.
17, so I think we're in the same ballpark. But that's a round number, and that's the average scenario because we don't know exactly which guys get traded.
Right.
I think so just quickly parenthetically on Vanderbilt, like I actually found some numbers on Vanderbilt that I shared in a recent Salt City 7. Um every single Jazz player has a worse net rating when they're on the court with Vando than they have when they're not on the
Mm-hmm.
court with Vando, when they're on the court without Vando.
Yeah.
Um so that's interesting and makes me wonder if Vando is really like unlocking wins at all, but that's a side conversation. Um, the other point I'd make answering your response is like the other thing that I think will happen if the Jazz trade a Mike Conley or a Jordan Clarkson, and I don't know that they will. I think I would put it at 50-50 that they trade one of those guys, um, but the other thing like Lowry Markkinen over the last 27 games, if you trade Mike Conley, Lowry Markkinen is going to be 83% as good
Mm-hmm.
because Mike Conley unlocks things and he organizes things and he makes life easier for Lowry. And he knows that in this set, I need to get the ball to Lowry at this moment because that's when he is able to come off that curl and get his shoulder in front of the guy. And if I get it to him earlier, then he's got to think about two things at once. And like little things like that matter. Um, if you trade Kelly Olynyk, then you're asking guys to play more minutes with, possibly a replacement level big to
Well,
close the season.
yeah.
And
Well, Doak played last night when
right,
they needed some minutes at center when Vando was out. So
yeah, yeah. So if suddenly Ochai Abaji, whom I love, like don't take this isn't a slight at Ochai Abaji, but
mm-hmm.
if you're playing Ochai 30 minutes a game all of a sudden, then like you've just made everybody's job descriptions a little bit harder, including the guys who are really good, like who
Yeah,
are who are
yeah.
all-star level players like Larry Markkinen. So I do think that that'll have an impact, and people need to factor that in to their projection when they're thinking about it. I also think that if the Jazz do go into that mode where they send a couple of veterans away, that they won't be doing it to lose games. But also, we've said all along, and Jazz Brass have said that this is a fact-finding mission. And at a certain point, you've learned enough about Lowry Markkinen this season to go, okay, let's learn some other things. Let's
Mm-hmm.
collect some data about some other things. What happens when we have Ochai Abaji playing with Walker Kessler and, and a couple of guards? So I do think that there's a chance that Lowry Markkinen develops a sudden case of tendonitis or whatever, not with the goal of just let's go lose more games, but like let's go start collecting some information that is going to be useful in the future because like guess what, they've learned what they need to learn about Lowry, and it's that he's a stud and that he can produce at an all-star level, and that he can lead an offense at least in the interim while they're identifying who their kind of 1A star is going to be, and maybe it's going to be Lowry, but so for all those reasons, I think the last 27 games are going to be rough for any Jazz fans who are living by the win and loss column.
Yeah.
But they'll also be really fun 27 games because we might have some new guys to get acquainted with. We might have, there will be a lot of things happening in the last 27 games, but they might not be winning at the same clip that people have gotten accustomed to. Is I guess the moral of why I included that question.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking, and I've shared this with you before, and I know that this is fraught with problems because of smaller samples and things, but the Jazz started out the season for those first 13 games on a 63 win trajectory, if it had held up the whole season, which was never terribly likely. Then they went 30 games that they played at 27 win pace. Then they did hit that stretch where they had a whole bunch of home games, 10 games straight, where they had only 2 road games in there. They also had some softer opponents, and they also had a few stars sit out. Lucas sat out.
Yeah. Yep.
The Clippers had guys out. That was a 57 win pace. And then if they close like we're talking, they're back down into that 25, 26, 28 is your 10 and 19. So, that's not unrealistic to think. And then they're a 37 win team if they finish with 10 more wins, and we'll see where that puts them on the lottery list.
Yeah.
If that's how it closes. I mean, and again, I'm not rooting for the lottery list, the lottery order, but I'm a little more just going with the flow this year. But if these trades happen, I think that's the direction we're going.
One of my favorite old shows that's not on the air anymore had an episode about Napoleon's battle plan. I have no idea if this was really Napoleon's battle plan. I should have researched this before I used this metaphor. But at least in the premise of this TV show, they say that Napoleon's battle plan was to show up and see what happens. That's kind of how I approach Jazz games this year. I will admit that there have been a game or two where it's close at the end, and I'm like, come on, Nikola Jokic, pull this out. Not because I want the Jazz to lose and pile up lottery balls. I have said all along that I wanted the Jazz to reach this point in the season. I wanted them to reach specifically this week, not being open to all of their options in both directions. And I didn't think that was going to happen if they were still, 7 games over 500 at this point in the year. So there have been times where I've been like, okay, it wouldn't really bother me if the Jazz lost this game. But yeah, it has been a, comparative to last year, it has been a much more stress-free experience to watch Jazz games because I truly am just showing up and seeing what happens. And when the game gets over, I'm not upset almost regardless. The last 2 games have been a little frustrating just from a basketball standpoint because on top of losing, they just haven't been playing well, and that's kind of disappointing to see. But yeah, it's been a fun year because the absence of expectations has just meant that we can just see what goes on and see where it leaves the Jazz after 82. And look, we're 2/3 of the way there almost.
Yeah, two games out of the 6th lottery position as of last
and
night.
How many
as of last night and as of tonight after tonight's action.
And at the same time, doing some quick on-air research here, and at the same time, they're also exactly 2 games out of a guaranteed playoff seed.
Right.
So, that's kind of what I meant. Like, I kind of like getting here and having options. Now, do I want the Jazz to necessarily chase the 6th seed? I personally do not. But I'm glad that they're not in a situation where they feel like they're under pressure to, because they're closer to that than the other thing. So that's kind of what I mean in terms of my own personal rooting interests and what I think benefits the long term.
Yeah.
I think at this point, we haven't talked about Victor Wembanyama for weeks in at Salt City Hoops, because at this point that's a pipe dream unless lottery night just goes unbelievably well for the Jazz. They are too far removed from where they're going to be even in the top 5 of the lottery odds. But to your point, it's not that unrealistic that if they trade a couple guys, rest a couple guys, start prioritizing some youth, some development minutes, that they could find themselves, somewhere just outside of that, which is, at this point I'm just repeating the point you already made.
That's what we do.
Yeah, that's true. It's almost like we're related. Any final thoughts, Ken, before we wrap this baby up?
Not really. I was just thinking I don't usually close, and I won't. I'll hand it back to you to close, but I was going to just playfully close with, he's Napoleon. I'm Napoleon's brother. So, because I don't know who Napoleon's brother is, but Anyway,
let's show up and see what happens.
yeah, exactly. Especially on Thursday, because Thursday is going to be a pivotal day to decide. You know, I don't in either case. I don't think they're going to chase the 6th seed or chase the 6th lottery position, but the decisions they make tomorrow and Thursday will change their direction.
Could literally impact the next 10 years of Utah Jazz
Right.
basketball.
Right. And so that's no pressure at all.
Right. Yep. Well, that's a better close than I could have come up with. So over here, it's just Napoleon's battle plan. We're going to show up. We're going to see what happens. This has been a Salt City Hoops, not podcast, video cast, whatever you call it.
What?
Whatever you call
podcast with video, as Jimbo Redding calls it.
There you go. Shout out to Jimbo. Thanks for listening. We'll see what happens in the next 36 hours. Have a good whatever time of day it is for you, Jazz fans. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.